This podcast is brought to you by the Maryland State Library Agency. The MSLA podcast features presenters from statewide youth programs, as well as learning opportunities for library staff and resources for patrons of the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled.
Hello, and welcome to the MSLA Guest Hour. I'm Communications Manager Tim Pratt, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Nick Tanzi. Nick is an internationally recognized library technology consultant and author of the books Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach and Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs, and Services. Nick is a past column editor for public library magazines The Wired Library. His work has also been featured in publications including Computers in Libraries, Library Journal, American Libraries, and Marketing Library Services. Nick will be speaking at a number of events in Maryland in the coming months. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.
So before we get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. So I've been working in libraries about 25 years now. A library page was actually my second job outside of fast food. So while I was still in high school, started working at the Mastix Merchant Shirley Community Library, worked there as a page, later as a clerk in the Adult Services Department. Eventually became a youth services librarian, a trainee as I was still completing my MLS. And then I started moving into more of a technology kind of section of the librarianship. Worked as a digital services librarian. That went from kind of a one-man band to eventually running a department. And then I went into administration as the assistant director at the Mastix Merchant Shirley Community Library. And then I came over to South Huntington Public Library as also as an assistant director.
So can you tell us a little bit about the South Huntington Library? Size, location, staff, things like that?
Yeah, so we're located in Suffolk County, in New York, on Long Island. So, if you know Long Island, it's a fish, kind of a fish shape, and we're about the center of the fish. We serve a community of 33,500. It's a nice building. It's about 47,000 square feet, and we have a staff of about 68 employees, give or take.
Very good. And you're also involved with the digital librarian. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, how it all came about, and when it started?
Yeah, so actually, the digital librarian, it's kind of a blog, a website that I've been running. It's approaching 10 years now. Next year will be actually January, I believe, will be 10 years. And, it's a few things, one of which is a creative outlet where I talk about the intersection of libraries and technology. I've done quite a bit of writing, both in books and in journals. And writing is really hard, especially writing about technology, because you want that immediacy and things change and the publication process can take a long time. And so I found that being able to just kind of self-publish on my website was a way to kind of scratch that creative itch that I had, but also talk in a way where, I could address things with immediacy. And that came really in handy, in particular during COVID, when we were all trying to make pivots very quickly in a time of rapid digitization. And now, especially in the age of AI, where it feels like, you blink and everything's changed, that kind of, from my brain onto the interwebs is very helpful.
So what's your ultimate goal with the digital librarian?
I feel like a lot of times I don't know that I have a goal with it. I think it's just kind of it's again that creative outlet. It's a way to kind of give back a little bit to the profession and have information out there for folks that find it useful and just kind of see where it goes. It started small. I didn't think it was going to be going for 10 years. And certainly from a traffic perspective standpoint, it's gotten more traction and a lot more eyeballs on it. So I'll just keep going and see where it goes.
And why is it important for librarians to stay up to date with new technology?
Sure. Well, a lot of times when I talk about technology, I always say like, well, in what way does it kind of align with, our mission? And if it doesn't, maybe you're doing it wrong. And with libraries, and in particular with public libraries, our goals, I think, if we compare notes with other libraries, it's to kind of meet the informational and recreational needs of our community. And even staying true to that mission as the format of information changes, analog and digital, as the way we interact with information in the age of the internet, in the age of augmented reality, virtual reality, and now AI, that constantly changes. So just to stay true to that mission oftentimes means adapting to and adopting new technologies. And so anytime you're ever questioning why are we doing a thing, I always say to approach it from a standpoint of digital equity, and you can't really go wrong if you're sticking to digital equity as a library.
Gotcha. And you just mentioned artificial intelligence. Can you talk a little bit about the history of artificial intelligence in libraries?
Sure. I mean, it's always tricky because artificial intelligence, I think right now when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking in particular about generative AI. That's kind of what has our attention. Things like ChatGPT or text to image and text to video generators. And AI is a very subtle technology. And it's been in libraries for some time and in very kind of customer or patron facing capacity for a number of years. Part of that is in the digital age, if you think about the libraries and we think about our digital branches, our websites, they're an amalgam of third-party services, right? While it might be the library, the Maryland State Library, or the South Huntington Public Library, it's databases and it's software that does a program calendar and it's software that does online learning and all of these things. And those third parties have been early adopters oftentimes of artificial intelligence. So by way of example, Libby, okay, that supplies ebooks to 95% of public libraries. Back in 2019, they would point out that about a third to even almost 40% of their customer service was handled by AI, by chatbots.
Hmm,
So part of the library experience for a very long time has been in artificial intelligence and maybe in ways that, chatbots seems like an evolution that we're not even talking about and to some degree are uncomfortable with. But that's been part of the library experience vis-a-vis the third party software and vendors.
gotcha. And you kind of touched on how it's being used in libraries today. And how do you see the role of AI changing in libraries in the future? Or do you see it changing? Or how do you see that evolution kind of playing out?
Sure. Well, it's tricky. We're confronted with an incredibly disruptive technology, right? And one that we can just list any number of ethical concerns we have, from privacy and consent, intellectual property, um, algorithmic bias. And so right now, kind of the important work we have to do is just determine what is an appropriate relationship with AI, both as individuals and as organizations. But then, somewhat, difficult is even if we don't like the technology, it's a technology that's impacting our patrons, and they need to understand it. We need to make sure that we're getting the best outcomes because you have a technology that there's wide access and little understanding. And there's an important role for libraries to play in terms of demystifying the technology, in terms of showing people the privacy and ethical implications of the technology as it changes the way we search for information, never mind the quality of information, and trying to determine the veracity of information. Those are all spots for the library. And it requires our engagement at the same time that we also have to clearly identify where that technology is problematic and where we need to kind of avoid certain use cases.
So, who in the library community should be learning about AI and why?
Yeah, well, I think that it's one of those technologies that we all need to, kind of engage in safe experimentation to understand how it works, and then, start coming up with that beginning of policy and regulation. And it needs so many eyeballs on it because it is very much a Swiss Army knife. It can be used in so many different ways that the more people and the more perspectives in particular that you have that are evaluating it, the better, more holistic understanding we'll have of it as a profession.
And what do you see as some of the downsides of AI in libraries in particular?
Sure. I mean, part of it is just a matter of privacy. So in limited memory AI, it, you have your training model that kind of makes up you know, the the capability of the AI, right? What does it know? Not really know in quotation marks, but what's the data set it reaches into? And part of that is built around human and environmental interaction. So when you ask it a question, you are also training the AI and it's remembering that interaction. And so that can be kind of a limit on free inquiry. It's like somebody reading over your shoulder. And we need to be concerned with that. AI is also being used as a tool of censorship. Mason City Schools, somewhat infamously, is using ChatGPT to determine what books to ban. So it's a matter of accuracy and algorithmic bias. Behind it all is math. And so when you're searching for information, it tends to equate popularity because that's, probability, popularity with correctness. That's dangerous. And it also can suppress a minority viewpoint if, the popular thing, not even the correct thing, is what surfaces. So it's got a lot of issues, never mind algorithmic bias. It can present a skewed biased view of the world. A text to image generator, what it produces, if you ask it for a picture of a criminal or a CEO, it can play on racial stereotypes, on gender stereotypes. And unfortunately, we tend to equate the machine as being above it all, as being unbiased. We're trying to take it out of the hands of people who we understand have biases. But the technology ultimately is people powered. We build the training model, we inform the training model with their interactions. It has the capacity to perpetuate some of the existing biases that exist in society.
Gotcha. And what advice would you give to a librarian or an administrator who has concerns about AI in the library?
Yeah, I mean, one of the important things to be doing is talking about this and talking about it with people that, agree and disagree with your perspective. At the South Huntington Public Library, one of the things we're doing is an AI user group for staff where we're exploring different use cases. We're showing some of the harm and the potential for harm, the things like algorithmic bias, the privacy concerns. We're seeing what tasks it can perform well and poorly, and kind of coming at it with a different angle on people who are maybe AI enthusiasts and some folks that are, I won't call anybody an alarmist because it's a technology to be alarmed about, but maybe skeptics would be good. And that skepticism is good and necessary. And just approaching it and seeing, how can we understand it better? What concerns or where do we need more clarity? Because we're very much talking about policy now. And to what degree do we need new policy? Do we need guidance for staff that don't know? Can I use this? Should I use this? How am I allowed to use this? What is it good at? What is it bad at? Again, that problem of access without understanding, that is the kind of the status quo right now.
So have you established your policies up there at South Huntington, or is that coming from a county level or state level, or what kind of like
Sure.
guardrails
Um,
are you putting in place up there, I guess?
yeah. So right now, we're part of there's like I'm going to get my exact number wrong, but around 50 plus libraries in Suffolk County, and we each kind of independent. Okay, so we set our own, policies. We go to our own, individual taxpayers for our funding. And what we're doing right now is very much policy review, because we're always continuously reviewing policy, as I imagine most libraries are. And now when we do that, we have to imagine like there's a robot in the room with us, right? And what does
Hmm.
that mean when we're doing collection development policy? Do we need to make a statement about AI authored books or not? Especially when accuracy is important, and AI is writing books about what mushrooms are safe to eat.
Hmm.
That's potentially problematic when we talk about book banning, right? If you can challenge materials, what does it mean when you have a technology out there, ChatGPT, that I can author 300 challenges in a weekend and hand them in? Does that break your existing policy? Never mind AI specific policy. Right now, really, I think review is the most important thing. To what
Hmm.
degree does this technology break existing policy?
And it sounds like, education is a big part of what is needed here. And you're going to be speaking at some events here in Maryland in the coming months. Can you just talk about some of the things that you're going to be doing down here?
Yeah, sure. In kind of mid to late September, I think the 18th and the 25th, we're going to be doing some programming around, at first just understanding the technology, like what is AI when we talk about AI? What are the implications for libraries? How is it impacting us? And what is the potential impact? And understanding that. And then after that session on the 25th, I believe, is a session on getting your library AI ready. And that's very much about policy review. What do you need to do with regards to training? What is that structure you have to begin to be putting in place um, in anticipation of the changes that are coming. And what does it mean for program and service development? And then I believe later in November, we're looking at, speaking with the branch manager summit, which is again more of that management perspective. Again, what is the implications? What conversations should we be having with those we supervise? What kind of understanding do we need of this technology? So really just preparing us for the changing technology environment.
Gotcha. And so are you going to be presenting or leading discussions, or what is your role exactly going to be? Like, what can people expect if they sign up for these things?
Sure. So I always like to keep it conversational.
Mhm.
So I, as much as possible, avoid jargon. We all know in libraries there's lots of jargon that exists, and then you introduce AI jargon. I think is unhelpful. So my overall goal is to approach it conversationally and as unbiased as possible. I'm neither an AI enthusiast nor a prophet of doom when it comes to AI, but kind of talk about it warts and all and then to engage in discussion. We want it to be discussion rich. So a lot of these talks are really about 50% content and then conversation. So we can, discuss what we're talking about, kind of share perspectives and obviously learn from asking tough questions.
Why is the timing of these events so important or so relevant? I mean, it seems like everybody's talking about AI these days. I mean, is this just a sign of the times, or like, talk about the timing here, I guess.
Yeah, it's tough when we talk about AI. It feels like it's in such a hype cycle, right? There's a certain gold rush around AI. We see it being thrown into conversation somewhat unnecessarily sometimes.
Hmm.
It's part of that new corporate speak that we see. And I think that lends itself to some of the skepticism we have about AI when it seems like it's just overhyped. But it is a technology that exists, that is increasingly commonplace, and is impactful. As we enter an election and people are questioning whether what they see online is real or not, with deep fakes and with the whole media literacy component, it's important to understand the technology and its capabilities, if only to be more skeptical consumers of information. So that's partly, I think, what's pushing the immediacy of talking about it in the here and now. The other piece of that is it's unregulated. It's just an unregulated space. We have one executive order that exists, which, again, depending on the outcome of the election, may not even be there. So you don't have the permanency of law regarding this technology. So some of the only spaces we have to affect change is kind of that policy within the library, but our own use of the technology. And I think in order to best regulate the technology within our own kind of confines, is kind of predicated on understanding it as much as we can.
Gotcha. Very good. And switching gears a little bit, I'd kind of like to get to know you a little bit better, not just your professional work, but could you talk about your experience with public libraries before you started down this career path? I mean, did you have a particular library you enjoyed visiting while you were growing up? And how about now, besides your own, of course?
Yeah, I know it's always tough, right? And my wife works in the libraries too, so I also have to praise the Middle Country Public Library in Center
Okay.
Reach. Um, yeah, it's funny. Some of my earliest kind of positive association with libraries was, growing up, probably around fifth grade, I was in like a after school program, which took place inside a school library. And that was great. I found like my reading nook, and it was kind of this kind of haunted corner of a library. And it happened to be where the ghost stories were. So that was very helpful. And then, the first library I worked at, the Mastix Maritza Shirley Community Library, was, that was my hometown library that I also had the pleasure of working in. That was some of the earliest computer use. We were very early adopters of technology at that library, and I mean 1984,
Oh,
we had
wow.
public computers, and that was such a cool experience to be able to play some of those, early games on the Apple computers, the Macs. So, yeah, that was pretty formative for me was, the library felt like such a field trip, and then to be able to work there, as one of my first jobs was pretty cool.
That's awesome. And so, what types of books are you reading these days? Or do you have any time to read for pleasure, or are you pretty busy with work and technology stuff?
I am very much an audiobook, listener, and I tend to, I have a pretty decent commute, so I'm in my car a total of about 2 hours a day, and so, that's good for sci-fi epics and fantasy, high fantasy, with your those books that run 7 to 10 volumes,
Oh yeah.
and then a little bit of music history now, kind of the Athens, Georgia music scene.
Oh, okay.
So I'm listening to an audiobook right now about that, about
Oh,
a recording collective.
very interesting. It's a beautiful town if you've never been there. Um,
Yeah, no, I have not.
so, I mean, in what other ways do you take advantage of the resources that public libraries offer? I mean, as a customer now.
Yeah, I mean, I am a heavy user of the Libby app, and now that I have young children, they love the library, and it's nice that I didn't have to like instill it in them. It kind of came naturally. Of course, they're interested. Where does dad work? Where does mom work?
Hmm.
But they love reading. They love books. They love the experiences too that are in libraries, kind of that those play spaces and especially now outdoor learning spaces, for example, that we're really seeing a lot of libraries develop. So yeah, part of it is just my own kind of usage is very much as a digital user, but the next generation is also it's not a purely digital generation. That they're very interested in the tactile.
Yes, very, very true. And so how do you see the role of public libraries in our communities in general?
Yeah, so I mean, earlier I kind of alluded to we have that goal to meet the informational and recreational needs of a community, and that's partly why we change our approach as those needs change. But I think one of the important things we also do is to navigate disruption. Age of the internet was a disruptive time. We think about it fondly now, but in the before times, before dial-up internet, that was a culture shock, and people had work that kind of disappeared, job displacement, and that type of thing needed to upskill. And in the age of AI, I'm seeing that same thing now, where there's certainly a concern about job disruption, about how it changes the economy. A lot of the same confusion about how do you find good information? What does effective information seeking skills mean in the year 2024? So those are things that I think are kind of evergreen, where we've always helped people upskill. We've always helped add context in unclear times and accurate information. And that's partly why, in the age of AI, and I'm somebody that thinks AI is here to stay, I'm very much a library optimist. And usually, personally, I'm always been a pessimist, but I'm optimistic on libraries because the things we do well, the things that are on brand for us, are very much in high demand. Privacy. How much more precious is privacy in the year 2024 in the age of AI? And accuracy, and humanity, that you can talk to a human being. Imagine that. So, the things we do and do well are at a premium right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you see a correlation between the health of our libraries and the success of our communities or community members?
I do. I think, healthy libraries are healthy communities. When you're putting the priority on community building, right? And on education and, good information and also different perspectives, right? All the things the library represents. That's the sign of a healthy community, I think. Even in our contentious times, we know that if you look at Pew Research, libraries still are one of the most trusted institutions, even in a time when there's a lot of institutional distrust.
Right. And putting on your administrative hat real quick, what are some of the biggest challenges you see libraries facing today?
Yeah, well, part of it is it's new and old. Okay, anytime a new disruptive technology pops up, there's the question of our relevancy, right? So, 1993 World Wide Web. Why do we need libraries? I have the internet. 1998. Why do I need libraries? I have Google. 2007. Why do I need libraries? I have the iPhone. I have the Kindle e-reader. Fast forward to the 2020s, and now well, I have ChatGPT. That is my librarian, right? So that's one of the challenges. Is again, folks that don't understand libraries and don't understand how we adapt and how we kind of embrace new technologies will see it as a competitor when it's not. It'll end up being another tool in the arsenal, and then one that we'll have to determine what's the appropriate use of it. We're also in a time of digital content is obviously quite popular. We know that there's a growth, although ebooks are plateauing a bit, but certainly with audiobooks, with video content, there's interest. But it's difficult for libraries to get that content, both from a price standpoint, from the lending rule standpoint. what's even available, especially as we look at streaming media, movies, and the like, we're at a competitive disadvantage because companies won't play ball with libraries. So that's a potential threat. It's a squeeze on our finances, and it's also availability concern there. So that's some of what I get concerned about. We have that stressor of trying to serve very different patron types, and we saw this during the pandemic in particular. Those folks that want in person and those folks that want virtual, and what's the appropriate way to serve both users that oftentimes have very different needs, and do it in a way that's cost effective without a redundancy of service.
Very
Nothing's getting cheaper.
right. So what do you think the future looks like for America's public libraries? Are you optimistic?
I am. I mean, again, you look at libraries, and it's a history of success in navigating technological change, of navigating societal change, and despite the idea that, like, with these dusty places with old tomes, you know that we make these pivots faster than plenty of places. Like, look at the pandemic and how many companies failed because they couldn't switch to online shopping or contactless pickup. And libraries made that pivot, I think, quite effectively without any additional funding. So I think our libraries are going to again just change with the times. We have again. It's tough that AI is such the elephant in the room, but it is our next big lift, I think, societally is, figuring out how do we guide our communities through technological disruption that's going to have an impact on the workspace. And the past will tell you that it's that we help people reskill. It's how do we adapt how you search for things, how you evaluate information. And again, we have a history of doing that. There was a time when you were a critical consumer of information. If you performed a web search to look for edu or .gov, say the information landscape got more complicated since then. So yeah, I always recommend that people check out their library and they throw it into the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, and you will see over the years how your library has consistently adapted to technological change to serve the community.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that stands out about to me is just all the resources that libraries provide, all the services, knowledgeable librarians. I think my first day on the job here, one of my coworkers said, "Books are our brand, not our business," which that's really stuck with me because they're doing so much for the community, working with different agencies, partnering with different agencies. So it's really amazing what our libraries are doing these days. And wrapping up, I mean, is there anything else you want to add about either your upcoming events or AI or libraries in general?
I would just reiterate that despite being a lifelong pessimist, I am quite optimistic about libraries in the age of AI. It doesn't mean it's easy or there's not points of friction, or that there won't be plenty of debate. But really, my suggestion is in these changing times is to engage with. That doesn't mean embrace. That doesn't mean necessarily integrate into library services, but engage in that evaluative process with artificial intelligence in a safe space where it's safe to ask questions, where you experiment cautiously, and engage with people that don't think the same as you. Those critical voices, or if you're a critical voice, those more techno enthusiast voices that are out there, just to get a holistic picture, and people that don't look like you and don't think like you, because this is a technology that will impact all of us differently. The stakes are very different for different people, and we need to be cognizant of that. And that comes out of conversations with a broader range of people.
Very good. And if people want to learn more, can you direct them to your website or social media? Like, where should people go?
Yeah, sure. So, my website is the-digital-librarian.com. And, I don't exclusively talk about AI, although it's been, a topic that has probably occupied more of my attention than most. That's a good place. And truth be told, if universities and university libraries in particular have really taken a lead because they've had to reckon with this technology, I think, earlier than many of us. There are a number of great libguides out there. When you're looking for how to cite AI or questions of academic honesty, a lot of good stuff out there. And finally, the Elements of AI. That's the University of Helsinki has a free online course that's all about, and it's for non-techies. That's a good primer on a lot of these technologies.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Nick. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And once again, this is the MSLA Guest Hour. I'm Tim Pratt, joined by Nick Tanzi. Thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Maryland State Library Agency. For links to additional resources provided by today's presenter, please visit the show notes. For more information on MSLA or the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, visit marylandlibraries.org.